They sign the paper, hand in the badge, turn off the email, and disappear. No fight, no lawsuit, no drama. Just silence. They walk away not just from the job, but from stability, salary, benefits, a future built over years. No one does this lightly. No one gives up security on a whim. They do it because something inside has already broken. Because if they stayed one more day, one more week, they would collapse, not from overwork, but from the slow erosion of their soul. The company calls it voluntary resignation. The boss says they couldn't handle the pressure. But the truth is far darker. They didn't quit the company. They quit the silence. The abuse disguised as performance. The environment that chose to protect the predator, not the person. And the most haunting question is not why they left, but how many others are still there, one breath away from breaking. There is a moment, quiet, irreversible, when the mind decides no more. Not after a fight, not after a warning, but after months, sometimes years, of silence, of unspoken pressure, of feedback that feels like humiliation, of goals that are not challenges, but demands disguised as ambition. The person doesn't wake up and decide to leave. They are expelled, pushed out by an invisible force, exhaustion. Not physical, not fatigue, but psychic exhaustion, the kind that doesn't show in blood tests, but in the eyes, hollow, distant, already gone. You don't lose your job in that moment. You lose your sense of self, your belief that you matter, your ability to trust that effort will be met with respect.
And when you finally walk away, not with a lawsuit, not with a fight, but in silence, you're not seen as someone who survived. You're seen as someone who failed. Couldn't handle it, they say. Not resilient enough. But the truth is the opposite. You handled too much. You endured the boss who weaponizes feedback, the colleague who undermines and gets promoted, the culture that calls exploitation high performance. You endured the silence of HR, not neutral, but complicit. The leadership that looks away when someone is broken in public. And when you leave, you're not quitting the company, you're quitting the lie. The lie that suffering is part of growth, that silence is professionalism, that loyalty means self-erasure. Modern work doesn't destroy bodies, it dissolves souls. And it does so elegantly, with words like productivity, purpose, excellence. Behind them, a void, a system that demands total surrender but offers no protection, that praises results but ignores the human cost, that calls constant pressure, culture, and emotional collapse personal failure. And when someone finally leaves, the system doesn't reflect, it replaces. Another name, another face, another soul to wear down. Because the system isn't broken, it's working, as designed, to consume. And when consumption becomes unsustainable, the body rebels, not with revolution, with disappearance.
The worst part is not the abuse, it's the silence around it, because abuse reveals itself, it shows its face. But silence pretends to be neutral. It hides behind procedure, behind policy, behind the illusion of fairness. And in that disguise, it becomes more dangerous than any outburst. The HR department that receives a complaint and does nothing is not neutral. It is complicit. The manager who sees a team member being degraded in a meeting and says nothing is not preserving peace. They are enabling violence. And the individual, when they realize this, understands something profound. They are no longer part of the organization. They are an intruder, a foreign body in a system that has already decided they do not belong, even if their name is still on the payroll. This is where psychological collapse begins, not with a scream, but with a slow unraveling. You start to doubt your own perception. Am I overreacting? Is it really that bad? Maybe I'm just not strong enough. This doubt is not accidental. It is manufactured. One of the most effective tools of psychological control is to make the victim question their own pain. And when that happens, breakdown is no longer a possibility. It becomes inevitable. Because as long as you believe the problem is within you, you cannot change the environment. You can only change yourself. And at the limit, the only change left is to leave. Not by choice, by necessity. Like someone fleeing a fire, not because they want to, but because the air is no longer breathable.
The tragedy is that when the person finally walks away, the system does not learn. It does not reflect. It does not change. It files the case under voluntary resignation, waived all rights, did not work out, and moves on. The same manager stays, the same culture persists, the same empty speeches about well-being are repeated in training sessions, and new employees arrive, full of hope, energy, desire to prove themselves, unaware they are stepping into a machine designed not to nurture, but to extract. A machine that does not measure the human cost of its goals, because the human is not on the balance sheet. They are on the turnover report. And even then, the number is not seen as a symptom, it is seen as data. Turnover within expected range. As if it were normal for people to leave with depression, anxiety, undiagnosed trauma, because the environment turned them into survivors, not professionals. And the cruelest part? Those who leave are not seen as survivors, they are seen as failures. Couldn't handle the pressure. Lacked focus. Not cut out for the market. No one asks what the pressure concealed. No one investigates what focus demanded. No one acknowledges that the market, in many cases, is a psychological battlefield disguised as opportunity. And that leaving it at certain moments is not defeat, it is resistance. Resistance to the erosion of the soul. Resistance to the erasure of subjectivity. Resistance to the idea that you are merely a resource, a number, a productivity machine that must function without flaws, without pain, without limits.
There is a powerful illusion in the world of work that suffering is personal, that if someone breaks down, it's their fault, that everyone has their own resilience. This idea is convenient, because as long as suffering is seen as individual failure, no one needs to question the system. As long as depression is framed as a chemical imbalance, not a rational response to an insane environment, the structure remains untouched. The company doesn't ask, why are so many people breaking? Instead, it asks, why couldn't this one endure? And in doing so, it shifts all responsibility onto the individual. It turns the victim into the guilty party, and psychological collapse becomes a moral flaw. But what happens when multiple people, unrelated, different roles, different departments, begin to leave in the same way? When the same pattern repeats, silence, exhaustion, resignation, disappearance without anyone speaking up. This is not weakness. It is a symptom. And a collective symptom is not an accident. It is a structure. A sign that the environment isn't sick. It is designed to be toxic. A system that demands total surrender but offers no protection. that demands results but ignores human cost, that speaks of purpose while treating people as disposable. This system does not just produce results, it produces trauma. It produces invisible scars. It produces former employees who carry within them the quiet belief that they failed, when in truth, they were abandoned.
Carl Jung once said that suffering does not come only from absence, but from the presence of what should not be. It is not only what is missing that destroys, it is also what is there but should not be. A boss who humiliates, a colleague who sabotages, an HR department that remains silent, a discourse of high performance that masks exploitation. These presences, repeated day after day, erode subjectivity. You begin to lose the sense of who you are. You stop trusting your own perception. You stop believing you deserve respect. And at the limit, you stop believing you deserve to exist there. Not because you are inadequate, but because the environment is incompatible with human dignity. And when this happens, leaving is not surrender. It is an act of self-preservation. It is the final gesture of someone who still recognizes themselves as a subject, not just a resource. The deeper tragedy, however, is that many who leave carry guilt with them. They believe they should have endured more, that they could have been stronger, that somehow they betrayed themselves. But the truth is different. They betrayed nothing. They obeyed an older instinct than any contract, the instinct for survival. The body knows when the environment is toxic, before the mind, before reason. It warns with insomnia, with anxiety, with unexplained pain, with a void in the chest that never fills. And when the body speaks, the soul listens. And if the soul is ignored long enough, it withdraws. Not dramatically, quietly, like turning off a light. And when that happens, no resilience training will help. No coaching will restore what was lost, because the problem was never the person. The problem was the place.
And this is where the ethics of work must be rethought. Not as productivity, not as delivery, not as goals, but as care, as protection, as recognition that the human being is not a machine, that they have limits, that they need meaning, that they cannot be reduced to a performance report. A healthy environment is not one where everyone endures. It is one where no one needs to endure, where suffering is not normalized, where HR is not a control department but a listening one, where leadership is not authoritarian but protective, where goals are not achieved over the bones of employees but with them, for them, because of them. Silence is the most powerful weapon of the toxic system. Not the shout, not the pressure, not the humiliation, silence. Because the shout can be challenged, the pressure can be reported, but silence? Silence disguises itself as neutrality. It says nothing, and in saying nothing, it says everything. The silence of HR when a harassment report is filed. The silence of a colleague who sees someone being degraded and does not react. The silence of leadership that hears a cry for help and answers with, "We'll talk later," a promise that never comes. This silence is not absence. It is a choice, and it is a choice that reinforces the power of the oppressor and destroys the courage of the victim, because when no one speaks, the message is clear: this is normal. You are the one who must adapt.
And in this void, the person begins to dissolve, not all at once, in fragments. First, they lose the will to speak. Then, the will to be there. Then, the will to exist at all. They still go to work, they still reply to emails, they still meet deadlines, but inside, they are no longer present. They are a ghost performing tasks, a body moving on autopilot while the soul slowly retreats, like someone abandoning a house about to collapse. And when they finally decide to leave, it is not a rupture. It is a collapse, an inevitable end to a process that began long before, in the first moment they stayed silent, the first time they doubted themselves, the first time they accepted that this is just how it is. But what happens to those who stay, to those who watch others leave one by one and remain, pretending everything is fine? They develop a subtle form of trauma, the trauma of the survivor, the one who stays not because they endure more, but because they cannot leave due to debt, family, fear. They see colleagues vanish with depression, burnout, anxiety diagnoses, and say nothing, because speaking is dangerous, because speaking might make them the next to go. And so they learn to live with the absurd. They normalize the insane. They joke about pressure. They call daily suffering high performance. And in doing so, they become part of the system, not as aggressors, but as silent witnesses. And silence, even when passive, has weight, it has guilt, it has consequence.
This is why, when someone finally leaves, it is not just a loss for the company, it is a mirror, a reflection of what the environment has become. And if no one looks into that mirror, the cycle continues. Another enters, another wears down, another disappears, and the system, unmoved, carries on, as if nothing happened. Because for the system, people are interchangeable, but for the human soul, they are not. Each silent departure carries a story of unrecognized pain, of violated boundaries, of dignity crushed. And when many follow the same path, it is not collective weakness, it is collective indictment, an accusation not spoken in words, but in absence, in disappearance, in quiet resignation. And here, the question must be reversed. Instead of asking, why couldn't they endure, we should ask, what demands such endurance? Instead of saying, they weren't made for the market, we should say, what market requires people to destroy themselves to remain? Because the problem is not in the fragility of the individual, it is in the violence of the system. And as long as we keep believing that psychological collapse is personal failure, we will keep producing more victims, silent, guilty, alone, while the real aggressor, the environment, remains unpunished, untouched, invisible. There is a rare and quiet moment when consciousness awakens. This is not normal. It is not normal to wake up nauseous before work, not normal to dream of your own funeral, not normal to feel relief when you lose a job. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs of sanity. They are the soul's final cry before total silence. And when a person finally decides to leave, even if they walk away from everything, they are not fleeing. They are returning. Returning to themselves. Returning to dignity. Returning to the right to exist without self-erasure. Because deep down, no one resigns from a company. They resign from omission, from hypocrisy, from the place where suffering is disguised as challenge, abuse as culture, fear as motivation. And in this return, healing begins. Not immediately, not easily, but it begins. For the first time in a long time, they can breathe.
they can look inward without fear. They can ask, "Who am I beyond what I was required to be?" This space of silence, of absence of pressure, is where subjectivity begins to be reborn, where perception realigns, where they understand they were not weak, they were in a place that demanded the annihilation of self as the price of staying. And leaving was not defeat. It was an act of courage, the hardest one, saying no to the system. No, I will not continue. No, I will not let myself break. No, I will not betray my soul for a salary.
But the deepest truth is not only in the departure, it is in what it reveals. It reveals that work, as it is lived today, is not just a means of survival. It is an existential battlefield, a place where identity is negotiated, not just skills, where meaning is given and taken away. And when meaning is eroded, no high salary, no benefits, no prestigious title can compensate. Because what is lost there is not just energy, it is soul. And soul cannot be recovered on vacation. It cannot be healed in a productivity retreat. It can only be recovered in silence, in listening, in the recognition that what happened was not failure, it was violence. Psychological, silent, structural. This channel, Psikelogy, exists to give voice to what is silenced, to name what is denied, to remind you that suffering at work is not fate. It is a choice of the system, not yours. If this video touched something in you, if it brought back the memory of someone who vanished, a moment when you nearly broke, a silence you still carry, then it has fulfilled its purpose. Because this is not about entertainment. It is about confrontation, about courage, about returning to yourself.
If you feel there is more beneath the surface of daily life, if you question the nature of pain, of repeating patterns, of the feeling of being lost, this space is for you. Subscribe to Psikelogy. Turn on the bell for the next videos where we will continue exploring the depths of the mind, the shadows of the self, and the paths to awakening. Leave a comment, just one sentence, one word that came up while you listened. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it now, because sometimes a single word at the right moment can make someone feel seen, and to be seen in a world of silence is the first step toward existing again.